Hi, everyone. Kitty Foss here, your storytelling astrologer, to try to talk to you a little bit about the word aspects and how aspects affect our charts and just an overall basic understanding of it. So, what aspects are is if we think about, I talk about the car is the engine is our sun, our moon is that inside of the car, how we personalize it. Our rising sign is the outside of the car, what people see first. An aspect is part of how those players discuss and talk to each other and how they affect how people see the outside of your car or how your engine runs or how your private energy works. And I talk about being a storyteller astrology, and aspects are a really big part of how the story of your energy weaves together in what kind of conversations they have. An aspect talks about the relationships between planets or points or asteroids in your chart. So that's why it's how the characters relate to each other in the story that's about your energy, that's about your car. Aspects are really important in your birth chart because they add a flavor to how your planets communicate or don't communicate, or how they act in relationship to each other. And daily, I do a reel about what the aspects are happening that day and how that might light up your chart and how you can use that energy. So we're going to talk a little bit about the different kinds of aspects, and they allow us strengths and weaknesses. So one of the first things to know about your chart is look at where your sun is. If your sun is from house 1 through house 6, you have a night chart. If your sun is above the horizon, you have from 7 to 12 in one of those houses, you have a day chart. And if you happen to do a solar return, that's an interesting way to look at how your year is. And all really what that means is that there are certain planets that have more strength in a day chart and certain planets that have more strength in a night chart. And we'll be talking about that in the class I teach, but that's just so that you know that piece of it. And the closer they are in degrees, the more power the aspect has. So it really is about a flavor that is added to your chart. So I'm going to go over some different kinds of aspects. So again, remember, the planets are what we're talking about, whether it's communication, transformation. The sign is the element that helps it, how that gets expressed, and the house is the where that conversation takes place. And it's important to know where the conversation takes place, because when you're looking at an aspect, part of the way it's figured out is its geometry, it's degrees apart, and that affects how strong or weak, and also depending on the planet. So one of the most powerful aspects is what's called a conjunction. Now, it's not really an aspect. It just means that the two planets are in the same sign. So it is in the fact that aspects are relationship. It's in a relationship in that energies, and they're united. So when something is conjunct something else, they're united in how they're working together in a daily energy. And if it's in your chart, they're also working together. When you're and that's a positive most of the time. All aspects live in duality, because sometimes that might be too much of an energy, especially if it's an energy that you have some issues with in your natal chart. So but it's a very powerful placement. A sextile is when the planets are 60 degrees apart, and it's what a sextile is. It's energy that you activate. It's a complementary energy. When that happens, they get along, and it tends to have a positive side because you're making a choice. It gives you an opportunity. Some sextiles are weaker than others because they're two planets that have different jobs in your natal chart or happen to be happening in the world, but it's an intelligent use for your energy to use that relationship when they're having a conversation, when you're able for this opportunity to activate it. So if you have a sextile in a day, it means you consciously activate that. Another powerful aspect is called a square. And a square is all about the four sides kind of pushing and holding a space. It tends to be seen as a not a more dense energy. It's a challenging, it's competitive. It has a lot of your shadow side that gets brought out because there's a feeling of not being able to move forward. But it is also a safety valve because sometimes two of those energies may run over each other and be harder to handle, and a square holds them in place. It's a different point. It always has different elements and different polarities. So it's male and female, water and earth, fire and air. So it's all of those sides kind of pushing against each other, which is why it can bring forth our shadow. But our shadow also helps us problem solve and warns us of problems. It's like it gets the ball rolling sometimes, a square. So, and it's an aspect that when something is square in a day, that kind of means it's holding each other back so you can kind of figure out which energy to use. Trines are, symbol is the triangle, are 120 degrees apart, and it's a harmonious energy. It's a blending. It's like putting something in your shake. You don't really taste that it's there, but it is all becomes a part of it. It is about serenity. It's usually all in the same element. It flows without much effort. But the duality of that is sometimes people call it lazy because you don't know it's in there, so you're not aware of it, and it's working in the background. When you're something's in a trine, it's kind of working in the background, and sometimes you have to be quiet enough to become aware of what it's doing, especially if it's bringing you a message. So again, every aspect lives in duality. Oppositions are probably what's considered the most difficult. And it's an opposition is 180 degrees. So it's the whole horizon, it's the whole spectrum. It seeks the energy to mirror the other energy. It's dividing hot and cold, warm and cool, black and white. It's the whole gambit, and it's extremes. And so one of the things that happens in an opposition is we feel the force of being pulled back and forth in this kind of seesaw level. And it's important to look at the elements because it will have the same polarity. It'll either all be male or all be female, but it will have opposite elements working. And so it's using the whole spectrum in order to work with an opposition. And often what it just means is we kind of flip flat back and forth until we figure out exactly what we want to do with the oppositions. Now, there are other things that people call aspects. Planets are in relationship in those aspects we were just talking about. And they're what are called 7 rays. Every planet has 7 rays that it gives forth. An aspect happens when one of those rays interacts with another planet. Again, it's the relationships between the characters of our energy on our zodiac, our story. And what happens is we have some planets that literally aren't talking to other planets. And so it's not really an aspect because it's not about a relationship. You've heard them in conjunct. There's all kinds of names for them. And there are other degrees that are assigned with them, but they're not in relationship. And some are completely not talking to each other. And some are more, I just get a little flavor of that aspect. And so I'm not really going to go over them. They're smaller parts of our chart, but basically what they're saying is there isn't a relationship, and often there's a workaround. They form things like yods and grand trines and bigger patterns, bigger aspects that affect our chart that if you have an astrological chart done, somebody might talk to you about, especially if you have a solar return chart done. And a solar return chart done will talk about aspects for your year, so that different relationships that might be happening with your planets in that year. So that is when we talk about some of that in conjunct, those other kinds of aspects that are out there. So this is just a basic view of it. If you can remember that aspects are one of those 7 rays literally touching another planet and having some kind of relationship. Sometimes you're the protagonist with a planet, and sometimes it's an antagonist with the planet. It's about the character. It's about how people see your car. It's about pinstripes on your car, or interactions with your car, as you move that sun, that moon, that rising sign, and all the other planets, along with in the story of your travels, your journey, with that power that is your vehicle. It's about the characters that ride along with you and how they interact in your story of your life. Here's hoping you're a hero of your own life in your own stories. Thank you.